My name is Meredith Calloway. I'm 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my grandmother stood up in the middle of our family reunion dinner, tapped her wine glass with a butter knife until the whole backyard went quiet, and pointed at my 9-year-old stepdaughter. She needs to go inside now, she said. This dinner is for real family. 90 seconds earlier, Piper had just asked if she could have the last deviled egg. I want you to understand exactly what that table looked like, because I've replayed it in my head every night since. String lights zigzagging across my grandmother's backyard in Savannah. 22 relatives packed around 3 folding tables pushed together. My grandmother, Judith Holloway, at the head, in her good pearl necklace, the one she only wears for church and funerals. And my husband, Nathan, 2 seats down from her, frozen mid-bite, a forkful of her pot roast halfway to his mouth. Piper just sat there, 9 years old, in the yellow sundress she'd picked out herself that morning, because she wanted to match the lemonade. She looked at me first, then at her dad, then back at the woman who'd just said in front of everyone that she wasn't real family. Nobody moved for what felt like a full minute. My Aunt Renee stared at her plate like it had suddenly become fascinating. My cousin's kids kept eating like nothing had happened, because kids that age usually don't catch the weight of a sentence like that until later, when somebody explains it to them at bedtime and they cry about it for the first time, quietly into a pillow. I stood up. I didn't yell. I want to be clear about that, because what I said next is the reason my grandmother hasn't spoken to me since. And it wasn't loud, and it wasn't cruel. It was 5 words, and I meant every one of them. But that moment only makes sense if I take you back 3 weeks, to a phone call I almost didn't answer, because I was up to my elbows in flour, trying to teach Piper how to braid a loaf of bread the way my own mother taught me on our kitchen counter in Ohio when I was about her age. My name is Meredith, and before that Sunday, I thought I understood every person sitting at that table. I'd been part of this family for 6 years since Nathan and I got married in his backyard under the same kind of string lights. Piper came into my life when she was 3, still calling me by my first name. And somewhere around year 4, without either of us deciding it out loud, she started calling me Mom on her own, quietly. The first time in a grocery store parking lot, like she was testing whether it would stick. It stuck. For 6 years it stuck, until my grandmother decided, 3 weeks before that dinner, that it didn't count. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning, my hands buried in flour up to the wrist. Piper on the step stool beside me, arguing that braided bread should also have sprinkles on it. Meredith, sweetheart, family meeting Sunday, my grandmother said, in the voice she uses when she's already decided something and just needs everyone else to catch up. It's important about the reunion. Sunday, my grandmother's dining room smelled like lemon polish and the good candles she only lights for company. She had a folder open on the table, tabs printed and color-coded, because Judith Holloway does not do anything without a folder. My mother sat beside her, quiet in the way she gets when she's already decided not to disagree with anything that's about to be said. My Uncle Roy leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, looking mostly at his shoes. 60 years married to this family, my grandmother announced, and I want this reunion to actually feel like something, like the ones we used to have when your grandfather was alive. That part, I understood. She missed him. Everyone missed him. He used to run the grill and tell the same 3 jokes every summer, and the yard felt different without him in it. Then she turned to the last tab in the folder, guest arrangements. Now, she said, smoothing the page flat with one hand, I've been thinking about the seating, and I think it's best if Piper sits this one out. I actually laughed at first, thinking I'd misheard her. Sits it out, I repeated. She doesn't need to come, Meredith. It's one dinner. Nathan's family, that's different. That's yours by marriage. That's fine. But this reunion is my side. Your grandfather's side. It's for blood family. Nathan set down his coffee very slowly, the way a man does when he already knows an argument is starting, and he's deciding how much of it he's willing to have in his mother-in-law's dining room. She's 9, I said. She's my daughter. She's your husband's daughter, my grandmother said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. There's a difference. And I don't think it's cruel to say so out loud. I raised 4 children and 11 grandchildren in this family, and I'm allowed to want one dinner a year that's just us. My mother studied her napkin like it had suddenly become the most interesting object in the room. Nobody argued. Nobody said a word in Piper's defense, and the silence had a rehearsed quality to it, like they'd already had this conversation once without me in it. I stood up. My hands were shaking, and I hated that they were shaking. Then I'm not catering the dessert table, I said, and we're not coming either. My grandmother smiled at me then, patient, the way you smile at someone who hasn't finished thinking something through. You'll come, she said, because there's something you don't know yet about this reunion, and once you do, you'll understand exactly why I needed to go exactly right. I didn't sleep much that week. I kept turning my grandmother's sentence over in my head. You'll understand exactly why I needed to go exactly right. It sounded less like a woman planning a family dinner and more like a woman bracing for something. So I did what I always do when I can't let a thing go. I started asking questions, one relative at a time, the way you'd pull a thread to see how far it unravels. My Aunt Renee was the easiest. I brought her a coffee cake on Wednesday and sat at her kitchen table while she cut it into slices she didn't need. Your grandmother's been different since your grandfather's estate finally cleared probate, Renee said, not quite meeting my eyes. The land out at Cedar Ridge, the old farmhouse, it's been sitting in limbo for 2 years. And the lawyer told her last month it's finally hers to divide. Divide how? Among the grandchildren. That's what your grandfather's will says. His grandchildren, by blood. I sat with that for a second. And Piper isn't blood. Piper isn't blood, Renee said gently. And your grandmother's terrified that if she doesn't announce it exactly right, in exactly the right room, in front of exactly the right people, somebody's going to make it ugly. Somebody's going to say she played favorites or that she left someone out on purpose, and it'll turn into the kind of fight that breaks a family for good. I understood then that my grandmother wasn't trying to hurt Piper. She was trying to protect a piece of paper, and she decided the safest way to do that was to make the room as small and simple as possible. And she hadn't thought, not even once, about what that would look like to a 9-year-old girl in a yellow sundress. I called my Uncle Roy next, mostly to see if his story matched. It did, almost word for word, except for one detail Renee hadn't mentioned. My grandmother had asked the family lawyer to draw up something extra, a separate provision. Roy didn't know the details, just that it existed and that it wasn't in the original will and that she'd added it herself, quietly, sometime in the last few weeks. That was the piece that didn't fit. If the reunion was only about announcing the land the way the will already said, there was nothing to be nervous about. Wills get read, people nod. Life goes on, but you don't add something new quietly at the last minute, unless you're trying to fix something you're not ready to say out loud yet. I thought about the way she'd looked at me across that dining room table, not cold, scared. My grandmother has never once in her life been easy to read, but scared. I know. I grew up watching her be scared for other people, quietly, in the back of church pews and hospital waiting rooms, never once for herself. Whatever she'd added to that will, it had her name on it and somebody else's. And I had exactly 4 days left to find out whose. I never did find out whose name was on that provision. My grandmother told me herself 4 days later, standing in her kitchen instead of her dining room, without a folder in sight. Sit down, she said. Before Sunday, I need you to hear this from me, not from Roy or Renee, or a lawyer's letter. She told me about the Cedar Ridge land. The same story Renee had already given me. 11 grandchildren, your grandfather's will. The fear of dividing something that mattered without doing it right. And then she told me the part nobody else knew. I added Piper, she said, 3 weeks ago. I went back to the lawyer and I put her name on that provision. Same share as everyone else's, blood or not. I didn't understand. Then why kick her out of the dinner where you're announcing it? My grandmother's hands were shaking a little, folded on the counter in front of her, because I was scared somebody in this family would make it about her, that they'd say I only did it to keep the peace, or that Nathan pressured me, or that it wasn't really mine to give. I wanted to say it clean, in a quiet room, before anybody could turn her into an argument. And instead of protecting her from that, I made her feel like she wasn't wanted at all. I got it backwards. I got it so backwards, Meredith. I stood there in her kitchen and felt something in my chest come loose that had been tight for 3 weeks. She's 9, I said. She just wanted a deviled egg. I know, my grandmother said. I know that now. That Sunday, the reunion happened anyway. String lights and all. And Piper was there in her yellow sundress from the very first minute. At the big table, not the kids' table, right beside my grandmother's chair. When Judith stood up to read my grandfather's will out loud, she read every grandchild's name in order. And when she got to Piper's, she didn't rush past it or explain it or apologize for it. She just said it, plain and clear. The same way she said everyone else's. And then she looked at Piper and said, "That's yours too, baby. It's always going to be yours too." Piper didn't fully understand what a land provision was. She understood that her name got said out loud in front of 22 people, and that her great-grandmother's hand found her shoulder afterward and stayed there. Later that night, after the folding tables came down and the string lights were the only light left in the yard, my grandmother found me by the dessert table. "I owe that girl an apology. She's too young to need explained to her yet," she said. "So I'm starting now, and I'm going to keep starting. Every reunion, for as long as I've got them." She has. Every year since, Piper picks the seat right next to her at the head table. And every year, my grandmother saves her the last deviled egg before anyone else even gets close. Some families don't get fixed all at once. Ours got fixed one dinner, one honest sentence, and one deviled egg at a time. And that turned out to be more than enough.